Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the Plesk channel. Today we are launching an occasional language corner in response to the recently announced reforms of our Ministry of Education, which have called for a greater emphasis on English proficiency. This video has Czech subtitles, and to facilitate the development of your language skills, today's conversation will be presented in English. General Sándor, I am delighted to welcome you to this channel. Good afternoon. Hello.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a nice pleasure to try to do the interview in English. So let's see what will come out of it.
Okay, let's move further. I have two questions for you today. The first of which concerns a recent initiative by Minister of Education to reform language teaching. First, a little introduction and then a brief question. Under this new initiative, pupils in primary schools will no longer have the option of choosing Russian as a second compulsory language, with French, German, and Spanish becoming the available options for their global importance. Consequently, English will be compulsory from the first grade. From a strategic point of view, how do you see this development? For example, let me joke a little joke. Every Finn knows at least the phrase ruky vверх, even if they pronounce it wrong, ruky ver. What do you think about it? What is your opinion?
Let me start not from the strategic point of view, but let me start based on my own experience with teaching languages. If you want to teach languages, or if you want your students or your pupils to learn languages, you need to have one serious preconditions. It's a number of teachers who are really qualified to teach. And I seriously doubt that we have that number of the teachers at our disposal in order to fulfill the dream minister has. Teaching a language must have results, and the results are at the end of some day that the students, pupils, or whoever learns is able to communicate. And I seriously doubt that we can do it. We have lots of textbooks, good textbooks, but I'm not certain that the teachers can use them and that they can really teach the students or the pupils to make themselves understood in English. To make it compulsory from the first grade, it seems to be in this situation rather a goal that can hardly be achieved in terms of the effectiveness of teaching English. It depends how many pupils will be at the classroom, whether you will have 5 pupils, 10, 15, 20, and language is also about vocabulary. It's really important to know the certain words in order to communicate properly. But if you teach them just the vocabulary and show them the pictures, and after a couple of years they're not able to put together just one simple sentence just to express what you want to say, it's a waste of time. So I'm not quite sure that this is more than public announcement just to show how big progress we made or we're trying to make in the future. So it's about English, and I'm not quite sure about Spanish or Italian or French. That would be even worse. I don't know how the situation looks like as far as the German language is concerned. Definitely the days and months or years when our grandparents were able to speak German because of the Nazi invasion from 39 to 45 is gone. So I'm not quite sure that we have as many good German teachers as we would really need. So at the end of the day, we may end up with having pupils being really stressed too much to learn 2 languages compulsory. I traveled quite a lot, and I know how good certain nations in speaking foreign languages, and particularly English, are. And in this respect, I'm afraid that we really want to achieve something that can hardly be achieved. There are certainly excuses to that fact, but I'm not sure that the Czech Republic would be that exception. What I would like to avoid, cost what it may, and it's based on my own personal experience, to create Czech English. At the beginning of 90s, we were confronted by the Hungarian language, which was understood by Hungarians themselves, but hardly by any other in Europe, and by the British or the Americans even in particular. So I welcome the fact that the pupils from the beginning would be taught foreign languages, and English in particular. But do we have the conditions? And I quite right. And as far as the Russian is concerned, I would like Russian language to be the compulsory language. On the other hand, I realize it's one of the 6 United Nations languages that a large number of the people in the world speak Russian, and then you can make yourself understood in Russian in many other countries, particular countries that we know from the former Yugoslavia and other countries. So I wouldn't push pupils to learn, but I wouldn't close the door for them to learn. So I don't think that in terms of languages, the Russophobia has a place to be. But we can, at this moment, hardly can do anything just to change the situation. So that is my perception. As somebody who's got a grandchildren and who's got a 16 years old guy who studied English for what, 8 or 10 years, and speaks nearly zero. So where is the efficiency? And that would be the major goal to see. Do we have the conditions in order to achieve a right efficiency?
Okay, thank you. And let's move on to the next question. Minister Dvořák would like to increase defense spending by raising taxes. Is this something that Czech society can understand and handle at all?
I read that interview, and I have to say that I was really surprised whether he really means it or whether he's really serious or not. To spend 420 billion crowns for the military is something that I really cannot imagine even in my wildest dream. Every percentage of the gross national product is something between 80 to 85 billion crowns. So what I would expect from the government and all the political parties to say really, to stipulate really what the army should look like in terms of the part of collection defense organization NATO, and what the role of the army should be as an instrument of the independent country. That is my perception, how we should look at the army, its equipment, training, and other programs. I'm 100% sure that 400 billion crowns is too much to be spent in 1 year. They cannot spend 160 in one year. And the reason let me say it in a different way. United States has the largest army budget all over the world, more than $800 billion. And is one of the unique countries when they go to the parliament or the Congress to approve that budget, they may start, for the sake of argument, they may start with the $850 billion and they will end up with $890 billion. The congressmen even add some more money in order to give the job to the companies in their own countries, I mean, in the countries of the United States. Even if the United States left the NATO, their budget would be the same. I don't believe that they would lower the budget subsequently or accordingly to the fact that they left the NATO. So the money that goes to, we say, NATO wants us, or we accepted the fact that we were going to pay 2% of GDP and now somebody wants 5% of GDP. It doesn't mean that that money goes to NATO. NATO has the only joint unit, only one unit in NATO that can be called NATO unit is the AWACS fleet. This is the only NATO fleet. So the rest is what the nations voluntarily contribute to NATO based on their specification, on their abilities, whatever. And that's what is NATO about. NATO is not NATO and us. NATO is us in NATO, and we agree on the force projections, force planning, and things like that. And in our country, the funny thing is that NATO is not looking for our F-35 aircraft to enhance the air power within the NATO. NATO wants us to improve our mechanized brigades, in particular the 7th Brigade in Hranice, just to make it more really strong and heavy armored brigade. But the Americans wouldn't say no if we want to buy F-35. That is a basic problem. So and talking about 5% of GDP tells me that we have given up any idea of creating new European security architecture, that we have gone through the path of the confrontation with the Russians. I'm not saying it's our fault, it's there. They started the aggression against Ukraine, but if we do not look for new architecture, we may end up in a real difficult, heavy war that would really need us to spend much more than 5% of GDP. And talking about raising taxes, I'm not quite sure that the chairman party of the party from which Minister Dvořák is was very much pleased to hear that interview, because raising taxes, talking about raising taxes before general election is not a good recipe for a good results in general elections. So, okay, and the last thing I would say about that is, if you really want to be taken seriously by what you say and by what you do, the best thing is that the leaders of NATO sit in one room, talk about the spending, about really achievable spending, and then to come up and say, okay, we agreed on 3.5% in terms of 10 years or whatever. But if somebody says 5% and one country says we can't do it, the other country says no, that's so we're not, we can't be trusted, we can't be taken seriously by the ones we consider enemies. So I don't like that policy, and it should be discussed more profoundly within the politicians. And then when they agree on that amount of money, okay, it may be the part of the public discussions, media discussion, but this way I really cannot take it seriously, and I cannot take it as something that is really worth considering as a way to improve our defense capabilities.
Thank you for your standpoint. And last question in today's interview. If you have learned Russian, how do you rate the quality of teaching, and what is your experience of the language? it is said that language is not only a means of communication, but also a reflection of the soul of its users.
I have even a university couple exams from Russian, but as we know, as we constantly joke, our Russian is "Já fachal s lopatou za nadrážom" or "Tramvaje byly nacváknuty." It's as difficult language as English is, as German is. There's a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems within Russian language, and the language we learned is completely different from the one that is spoken in Russia itself. So I'm not claiming that I'm able to make myself understood in Russian. I can read, I can write, but I won't be able to really understand the spoken Russian English if it's really in a normal speed. So that is partly from my suspicion about the teaching English come from. If the Russian or the teachers of the Russian language were not able to teach us properly Russian language for many years, I'm not quite sure that we have as many good English teachers to do it better in English.
Thank you for this very interesting remark and conclusion. General Shandor, thank you again one more time for your kind words. I hope you have a lovely day today, and I can't wait to see you again next week. To all my wonderful listeners, thank you for tuning in. Wishing you all the very best. Takže díky moc za dnešní participaci.
I hope you will tell me the reactions to our interview to English, and because quite often I don't have the capacity to read all the comments, and if I read them, I have a bad stomach to swallow what I read, because it's okay. So all the best, and thank you very much, and I'll hope to see you next week. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
It is difficult to satisfy all the listeners, but nevertheless, we tried our best. So, ladies and gentlemen, from behind the microphone, goodbye and take care. Yours truly, Vladimír Franta. Možná bych měl říct, it was Vladimír Franta behind the microphone. Goodbye to you all. Yours truly, Vladimír again. Říkám to špatně, Ergo, tak musíme rozloučit líp.
It's up to you.
Tak já to musím říct ještě jednou. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. From behind the microphone was your Vladimír Franta. Pardon me, so sorry for the level of my English. I am not that well versed as in Russian, but I am going to improve everything. So this is definitely goodbye to you all. Bye-bye.
I'll tell you frankly, I wish as many people as possible speak English the way you do. Don't be too shy and don't be too modest.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.